Parliament, York. I see that there are no other members of Parliament with questions or comments, so I will actually add some of my own. And one of them, well, let's just go in order. The first one is that I actually take note of the difference between the individual assessments and that are manually assessed. So the personal tax assessments are manually done, whereas the businesses are automatically generated. And I would like to remind or even say for the first time that when we had the presentation by the General Audit Chamber, last year, towards the end of last year, we were given an example of an assessment that was completed to have as an example for us to walk through it and talk through it. And one of them was an assessment for a foundation, just as MP Westcott previously alluded to, that when you are having this automatically generated assessment, where does your stichting or foundation or not-for-profits fall? And I wanted to really mention that because of the fact that the ones that we were saying that we had, there was errors on the year assessment on it, but then there was also an assessment of 200,000. So it's just to clarify that also for public consumption and understanding that nonprofits, stichtings understand, even though we are required by law, which is something that some people are, some of the members of Parliament have referred to today, even though we are required to do our tax assessments, what is the message we are giving to the public? Whether you are a NV, a BV, a stichting, a not-for-profit entity, and an individual, that we all understand that we have an obligation to file our taxes. And these are the scenarios where maybe perhaps an assessment, an automatically generated assessment may pop up, but then how do you react at the end of the day to that? And what I would recommend, perhaps just as a recommendation to the Ministry of Finance, is to ensure that infomercials and go out, not just words, but sometimes you realize that videos have a lot of impact. Short videos have a lot of impact, and the confusion that is still out there about tax is one that I think that we have a role to play as government or our ministers to ensure that it's as easy to comprehend as possible. The next one was going back. I'm just going to go back to reiterate the response, whether a response was sent to the audit chamber. And the reason I'm going back to it is even though I referenced the last page of the report that talks about the response and no response being made, when you review the contents of this, it's a very, very short report. Most of their reports are under 15 pages. But certain comments that are said inside, if it's read by the public alone, whether it's read by us or whether it's read by persons in our community, because the documents are public, it gives the Ministry of Finance the opportunity to either correct or support those comments. Because this report was done with an interview of persons within the tax administration. So it's not something that is done by, let's say, the General Audit Chamber using their own volunteered tax assessments as a sample for us here to review in a closed door standing. So of course the confidentiality is protected of the entity, and they did give us some examples and it was redacted with the name, but you saw that it was foundation or stichting. And I just want to make sure that the contents of this is properly sort of justified or clarified. I don't want to say they're right and you're wrong, or you're right and they're wrong, but I'm just going to go back to the fact that this report is here to help us hold the Council of Ministers accountable, whether it is about finance or any other ministry, and it will also help you all to improve your way of working if that is necessary. One of the questions I had about a tax assessment, well, based on the presentation and in general about the ex officio tax assessments, is what is the time frame of it? Because what we can conclude from this report and your presentation, Minister, is that you will get a ex officio tax assessment if you don't do your taxes in time. But we know that our taxes are due April. And how long after that do you get this? Because the example that is given in the report is, I'm sorry, I write my notes all over the place. The example that was given in the report is that when the interview was done of the tax administration to prepare this report by the General Audit Chamber, a note was mentioned that a project was underway to clean up tax files related to businesses, and this will run until July 2023. Remember, this was done, interviews were done during the year 2022. The report was issued April 2023. So obviously a follow-up can be done either through the through the finance ministry, or with us following up as well with the General Audit Chamber. But what is the update on this? Was it done? Was it cleaned up? Because the businesses that were assessed in 2019 and whether or not they still exist and in operation is what they were referring to in this cleanup. So I go back to the question of what is the timeline. So if I don't do my tax return to you, if I don't do my taxes, I don't file my taxes by April of 2025, does it mean that a year later I'm going to get the ex officio, or does it mean that it comes 4 years later? Because the example we're giving in here is 2019 businesses, and then we're doing the cleanup in 2022 and up until 2023. So I just want to get a timeline of it, because then, again, it's something that in your, if you all decide to do a infomercial to educate the public will understand that a year later, you're going to get an ex officio, and this is why you didn't do your taxes in the proper time for it. Also, I have a question about the assessments that are done automatically, which is specifically for the businesses. When we are preparing the budget, if I remember, the figures that come in the financials are done on a cash basis. If I am correct, please correct me if I am wrong. Which means that if it's done on cash basis, so the money that government makes or collects from taxes is done on a cash basis, which means literally every single penny we actually physically get into our bank account or in our hand is what is going to add up into your amount that we're going to reflect in our books, in our financials. But when we're doing assessments, how are those assessments used internally, and how are they adjusted for the budget purposes? So, because I understand cash basis, but if we're doing budget, how is it used internally for your own understanding of, well, we have an assessment. If we have our 100 businesses that are assessed at the maximum, or the 200,000, like we said, and not just for foundations, I mean for properly operating and inexistent businesses, how does that work internally for you to understand really what your potential earnings are versus the cash basis earnings? Because I would expect that the estimation is going to be very, very far away from the actual cash that we collect. So it's about, having a clear picture as well for not only internal purposes, but then when it comes to the floor of Parliament, that we understand the numbers we're dealing with and the source of it, just the representation that we're comparing all the time, apples and oranges, apples to apples, oranges to oranges, as much as possible. Also, again, a recurring question we had today from several members of Parliament was the plans between the receivers and the tax office working together. Sometimes when we get this tax assessment, and if it's a very high figure, the way that we object to it, as mentioned by some MPs, is that we will have our accountant sending an objection to an assessment, and then the process goes where we have to prove that this was done, or what the actual income was for the business or the individual to correct the amounts. And my question is, what are the plans for receivers and tax office to work together so that we are streamlining this process? Because when the objections come in, the objections go to both entities. They go to the tax and they go to the receiver's office. And it's a lot of duplication of effort, I understand, but then it will also help not only the individual doing their objection, but also the internal workings of the tax department, the inspectorate, as well as in the receiver's office. So what are the plans going forward for that? I'm just going to ask this so that for public consumption, again, it is clarified. It is also an additional one that I think constantly we will have to remind the public how we work and why things are the way they are, and why certain entities collect on behalf of government and that sort of thing. But AOV tax assessments are still sent on the tax letterhead and not SZV, but SZV collects it. Not everyone understands that, but if we continuously remind people of the fact that it comes on a tax letterhead, SZV is tasked with being able to collect that for you. They're the one receiving it, but they're also the one doing the payout, if I'm not mistaken. And it causes a lot of confusion. So it's just for us to reiterate that process, why that process exists, and just to clear up any confusion. And I think that is it for me. I will make a reference to another MP that noted the difference of the 10% for personal tax assessment versus business of 25%. And somewhere within this report, I'm sorry, I do not have the exact page. I remember reading that, well, for businesses, there's an issue with businesses being more difficult to collect from. And not understanding why businesses are the ones that are more difficult to collect from. I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me. That's why I said this is really handy report. But is it okay that we do that? Is the Ministry of Finance supported by having the differentiation between personal versus business? I understand if this report exists that, well, it might be harder for you to collect from businesses for whatever reason. Is there more work involved in improving the existence of the business? So it's just to make it a fair playing field between the two. I am not criticizing it. I'm actually absolutely neutral to understand why the differentiation exists. That is all for me in terms of my questions or comments. And I see that an MP would like the floor again. MP Arian, you have the floor.